took Starbuck half an hour to arrange the attack. It should have taken only minutes, but the rain made everyone slow, and even Starbuck was tempted to give in to the lethargy. "Davis! Truslow!" he shouted, wondering how any voice could cut through the pelting rain and gusting wind. "Hear you," Truslow called back. Starbuck hesitated. Once he shouted the next command, he committed himself to battle, and he was suddenly assailed with another racking bout of shivering. The fear was sapping him, but he forced himself to draw breath and shout the order, "Fire!" The volley sounded feeble, a mere crack of rifles like the snapping of corn stalks, but Starbuck, to his surprise, found himself on his feet and shoving forward into the corn. "Come on!" he shouted at the men nearest him as he struggled through the stiff, tangling stalks. "Come on!" The attack was ragged, but it was launched now, and Starbuck forced himself blindly on, expecting a bullet at any second. One of his men raised a feeble rebel yell, but no one else took it up. They were all too tired and wet to shrill the defiant call. A bullet flickered through the bent corn tops, shedding water from the bent corn cobs as it whipped across the field. Other than the one rifle shot, the Yankees were silent, and Starbuck knew they must be holding their fire until the ragged grey attackers were at point-blank range. It seemed stupid to die for a ford across the flat lick, but the stupidity of the endeavour did not explain his fear. Instead, it was something deeper, something he tried not to admit to himself, because he suspected it was pure, unalloyed cowardice. But the thought of how his enemies in the Legion would laugh at him if they saw his fear kept him going forward. He tried to shout a battle cry, but the challenge emerged like a strangulated sob. If it had not been raining, he would have suspected he was weeping. And still the Yankees did not fire, and now the enemy wood was close, very close, and the terror of the last few yards gave him a maniacal energy that hurled him through the last clinging stalks, through another vast puddle, and right into the trees, where he found the enemy was gone. "Oh, Jesus Christ!" Starbuck exclaimed, not sure if it was a profanity or a prayer. "Jesus Christ," he said again, staring in sheer relief at the empty wood. The intermittent sounds of battle died utterly, leaving the field to rain and thunder and the cold east wind. Night fell. A few feeble fires flickered in the depths of woods, but most men lacked the skill to make fires in such rain, so instead they shivered and wondered just what they had done, and why and where the enemy was, and whether the next day would bring them warmth, food, and rest. Starbuck just wanted sleep, nothing but sleep. But a prayer, he thought, might help. Something had to help, for he feared, God, how he feared, that he was becoming a coward. And then he was woken as someone shook his shoulder. At first he thought the shaking was part of his dream. Then he feared the Yankees must be attacking, and rolled quickly out of his wet blanket and reached toward his rifle. "It's all right, Major. Ain't the Yankees, just me. There's a man for you." It was Lucifer who had woken him. "Man for you," Lucifer said again. "A real smart man." Lucifer was a boy who had become Starbuck's servant, an escaped slave with a high opinion of himself and an impish helping of sardonic humor. He had never revealed his true name, and instead insisted on being called Lucifer. "You want coffee?" he asked. "Is there any?" "I can steal some." "Then get thieving," Starbuck said. He stood, every muscle aching, and picked up his rifle that he remembered was still loaded with its useless charge of damp powder. He felt his clothes and found them still damp. "What time is it?" he called after Lucifer, but the boy was gone. "Just about 5:30, a stranger answered, and Starbuck stepped naked out of the trees to see a cloaked figure on horseback. "Maitland," the mounted man introduced himself. "Lieutenant Colonel Ned Maitland." He blinked a couple of times at Starbuck's nakedness, but made no comment. "I've come from Richmond with orders for you. Are you Major Starbuck?" Maitland asked. "Yes." "Good to meet you, Major," Maitland said, and leaned out of his saddle to offer Starbuck his hand. He was hiding his reaction to Starbuck, who, Maitland thought, looked an atrocious mess. His body was white and skinny, while his face and hands were burned dark by the sun. A clot of blood scarred Starbuck's cheek, and his black hair hung long and lank. Maitland was proud of his own appearance, and took care to keep himself smart. He was a young man for a lieutenant colonel, maybe 30, and boasted a thick brown beard and carefully curled moustaches that he oiled with a scented lotion. "Where will I find Colonel Swinyard?" "On his knees, probably," Starbuck answered, pulling on his shirt and fumbling with its burned buttons. "You going to give me those orders?" "I'm to hand you the orders in the presence of Colonel Swinyard," Maitland said, then waited while Starbuck pissed against a tree. "You look kind of young to be a major," he remarked as Starbuck buttoned his pants. "You look kind of young to be a colonel," Starbuck responded surlily. He stooped to tie the laces of the boots he had collected off a dead Yankee at Cedar Mountain. Some of the Legion had drifted out of the trees to stare at the elegant lieutenant colonel, who endured their scrutiny patiently as he waited for Starbuck to collect his coat. Lucifer had come back with a handful of beans that Starbuck told him to take to Colonel Swinyard's bivouac. He pulled his wet hat onto his unruly black hair, then gestured to Maitland. "This way," he said. The colonel was at his prayers. The tent's flaps were brailed back, and the colonel was kneeling on the tent boards with an open Bible on his cot's blanket. "He found God 3 weeks ago," Starbuck told Maitland in a voice loud enough to disturb the colonel, "and has been bending God's ears ever since." The 3 weeks had worked a miracle on Swinyard, turning a drink-sodden wretch into a fine soldier, who now, dressed in shirt-sleeves and grey pants, turned his one good eye toward the men who had disturbed his morning prayers. "God will forgive you for interrupting me," he said magnanimously, climbing to his feet and tugging his suspenders over his lean shoulders. Maitland gave an involuntary shudder at the sight of Swinyard, who seemed even more unkempt than Starbuck. "Good morning, Nate." Starbuck ignored the greeting, jerking his head toward Maitland instead. "Man's called Lieutenant Colonel Maitland. Got orders for me, but says he has to see you first." "You've seen me," Swinyard said to Maitland, "so give Nate his orders." "Got him right here," Maitland said. He took off his damp, silk-lined cloak to reveal a uniform that was immaculately cut and decorated with a double line of brass buttons polished to a high gloss. The twin gold stars on each of his shoulders seemed bright enough to be made of gold, while the braiding on his sleeves appeared to be fashioned from gold thread. Starbuck's coat was threadbare, had no gold or brass or even cloth marks of rank, but only white salt marks where sweat had dried into the material's weave. Swinyard unfolded the sheet handed to him by Maitland, read it, blinked, then read it again. He looked up at Maitland, then back to the paper. "You done any fighting, Colonel?" he asked in what struck Starbuck as a bitter voice. "I've seen fighting, Colonel," Maitland said stiffly. "From a staff officer's horse," Swinyard said caustically. "It ain't the same, Colonel." He tossed Maitland's sealed papers onto Starbuck's lap. "If I weren't a saved man," he said, "if I hadn't been washed in the redeeming blood of Christ, I'd be tempted to swear right now. And I do believe God would forgive me if I did. I'm sorry, Nate. More sorry than I can tell you." Starbuck tore open the seal and unfolded the papers. The first sheet was a pass authorizing him to travel to Richmond. The second was an order requiring him to report to Colonel Holborough at Richmond's Camp Lee, where Major Starbuck was to take command of the 2nd Special Battalion. Swinyard took Nate's orders, read them quickly, then handed them back. "They're taking you away, Nate, and giving the Legion to Mr. Maitland." "Son of a bitch," Starbuck said, of no one in particular. He looked down at the orders. "What's a special battalion?" he asked Maitland. The elegant colonel gave Starbuck a half-smile. "I believe they're more commonly known as the Yellow Legs," he said with his irritating tone of private amusement. Starbuck swore and raised his eyes to the clouded heavens. The Yellow Legs had gained their nickname and lost their reputation during the week of springtime battles in which Lee had finally turned McClellan's northern army away from Richmond.